Hold out other hand.
Was conducting the electricity.
Our bodies, Mr. Angier, are quite capable of conducting and indeed producing energy.
In a moment of candid discussion, Joe Rogan hinted that before his death, Nikola Tesla revealed a terrifying secret, that its implications continue to echo through the corridors of curiosity. But what did Tesla unveil in his final moments, and why does it continue to evoke shock and intrigue even today?
It's important for people to look into this information. So the book is called Tesla, The Lost Inventions by George Trinkas. And this is the book that we'll be sharing today. And I try to always share different books so that we can see different sides of things. Now, what's interesting in this book is they talk about how Nikola Tesla was big on connecting into the earth. He believed that if we connected into the earth, we could tap in to the unlimited energy of the earth. But at the same time in which Tesla was around, there were other people, such as Marconi, who was trying to tap into the air and tap into the radio. But Tesla was all about tapping into the earth because the energy is all free. But if you tap into the air, there's a lot of troubles that you run into. You always hear the same phrase of radio on air because they're trying to tap into the air rather than the earth itself. Now, what's interesting is there's a quote on the back of here called, by Nikola Tesla, page 33, "Electric power is everywhere, present in unlimited quantities, and can drive the world's machinery without the need of coal, gas, or any other fuels." Right there. And do you see this? This is a free energy device, which is very interesting. This is a ground, this is a capacitor into a conductor, and this is a simple sheet of metal that can harness the sun. Now, what's interesting is I found a video the other day of solar panels being created in 1902. Now, what's also interesting about 1902 is Nikola Tesla was creating inventions in 1902, and there was also a reset in 1902. So solar panels were around in 1902 and looked exactly the same as what we have in 2023, and all of these free energy patents and free energy devices were around in 1902, but then there just so happened to be a reset that took place in 1902. It's almost like they were trying to eliminate this information. So what's fascinating about this is you get into this book and it shows all these things. If you guys can see here, I'll come real close so you guys can see that. So that's a dynamo. That's what that is. I mean, people can research into this one, dynamos. That's what Tesla was all about using, and also using lots of copper. So with dynamos, you could harness the beautiful energy that's all around us, and you could power everything. Now, what's interesting is a lot of Tesla's work was lost when they started using, for example, the nuclear fusion and all the stuff that they started using, and all these other things instead. But Tesla was all about the free ability to get the energy, whether it be from the earth or whether it be from the water. Lots of use of water, because water is always flowing. Victor Schauberger also talked about this. You always have water flowing. If you can capture the energy of the always flowing water, you have free energy. So interestingly enough, same exact thing, you could do that too here. Now, what's fascinating is it talks all about, in this, about how Tesla had over 700 patents. 700 patents. If we think about Tesla's work, 700 patents. Did he get this information from the old world? All those old world buildings had all different types of beautiful inventions. So did he get the information from the old world buildings that they were demolishing during 1902? There's a lot of demolishing that takes place. A lot of old world buildings, castles, different types of structures were all demolished during 1902. Now, what's fascinating is they always say that they demolished these buildings because they were too hard to upkeep. Now, what's interesting is they decided to leave the ones such as the Capitol building and all the other Capitol buildings in the United States. Those are all old world buildings. So those stayed, even though they were all too expensive to upkeep. But all the other ones, which were all located around the area, those were all demolished. You see how all of a sudden there's only parts of history which remain. And if we just see it as a building, they have hijacked the building with the architecture or the free energy devices in which it used to have. They hijack that building, take it over, and then turn it into their building, and then start to make a new story on it about how it was founded in 1776, and a bunch of people came over with a ship, and they just started taking some hammers and making some stone buildings which were already present before the people got here. But they didn't put that part in there. They didn't teach that in the history books. Now, what's also interesting is they talk about how he passed away, and as he passed away, before that, he was not receiving any funding from J.P. Morgan Chase. It says in here that J.P. Morgan Chase helped to promote him, and also, with the help of Westinghouse, those two people helped fund Nikola Tesla. Now, what's interesting is Westinghouse had a royalty set up with Nikola Tesla that if he could deliver X amount of horsepower or voltage, he would get like $1 on every horsepower and voltage he could produce. What happened was he was producing so much voltage and so much horsepower that they took the royalty away because he broke all of the things. He could have been the richest person in the world. But what's interesting is we look at some of the cool inventions, and I'm going to show some of these. So you have a disc turbine rotary engine. Check this. That's really fascinating. And it just spins in a circle. And what Tesla was stating in this book was that with engines, if they are just one piece which spins in the circle, you don't have to worry about replacing things that are going to be falling apart because you only have one piece to fix. So it can create energy, but is also easier to maintain. Now, what's interesting about 1913, 1919, that issue time of when the cars and the automobiles started coming out, they were very complicated. They have a whole bunch of parts that break down and have to be replaced. So what's interesting is this engine, you didn't have to do any of that. But with the newer engines, you have 1,000 new pieces that are all of a sudden being added into the engine. And as those pieces are added into the engine, now you have to replace them. And then that creates multiple industries which never existed. And then you create adapters to the adapter. So that was the first part. Now, what's also interesting as you get more into it, he talks about spark gap oscillators. Highly recommend everybody to look into this. This relates to electroculture. And what you're capturing, the spark of the earth or the static fields of the earth. So this is an interesting one to get into. And then as we move forward, he also talked about the medium, which is etheric energy. Now remember, the ether was removed from the terminology about the 1910s, 1920s, when electricity took its place. Electricity took its place because the ether was everywhere and was free, but electricity was only coming from one direct point or from wherever it was being harnessed. So slowly, in this situation, the term the medium and the ether was slowly removed. And what's also interesting was they talked about a lot of people in here where they started debunking Tesla's information and all of the stuff that he was doing because he was realizing that you could create different types of engines running on also the ether. Now, what's really fascinating, because I've talked about this before, is the use of mercury. Mercury is always one that we hear, everybody should stay away from. Mercury is not this, mercury is that, mercury is this. But what's fascinating is there's engines created using mercury. And if you think about it, since mercury doesn't go away or doesn't ever disappear, you could utilize it to create a beautiful energy engine which can just keep spinning and harnessing more energy, just like the lightning rods and weather vanes that I always talk about that were on top of the buildings, which also had mercury in them. So it's interesting when you get into his work, patent 609251, 1897. 1897, you have mercury engines. That's interesting. And we don't even talk about this in 2023. We have electric vehicles that get about 250 miles to the charge when we had electric vehicles that got over 1,000 miles to the charge in 1902. It seems like we're getting a downgrade. That's kind of what I can see from there. Now, what's also fascinating is we get into the Tesla coil. And this Tesla coil never used any iron. See this right here? This big, beautiful ball of energy right here can transmit energy and harness the beautiful energy of the earth. It talked about how Tesla did stuff with AC, talked about DC, talked about all the different things of how you could capture the beautiful energy that's all around us. And the Tesla coils were, which we'll move into in a second when we get to like the transmitters and things like that, were just another way of Tesla showing the spiral factor of when things are in a spiral fashion, they can capture the energy or the ether. And if you think about it, if you wrap your fingers or arms in a spiral fashion with copper or any type of metal like that, what are you creating? An induction coil or a Tesla coil. And there you go. This is how these little things work. So if you can see that right there, there's your little induction coil, there's your antenna, and then it's into a ground and usually a capacitor and a conductor. Now, a lot of this stuff, as somebody just commented, nobody was willing to commit to any of these things because they were getting things for free. A lot of things that people don't know about Nikola Tesla, such as Nikola Tesla, in this the beginning of the book, actually left Europe because nobody would invest into any of his ideas. It was only until he came to America that people thought, maybe I should give him some money so that he can kind of do some creations. So if you think about that, it's very interesting to think that all of these things were already created in 1884 when Tesla lived from 1856 to 1943. So it's interesting when you get into this. So now let's take it a step further, because now we're talking about all the stuff that's happening on the world. They have this new term called a hurricane, which we see in 2023. All this hurricane nonsense, hurricanes and quakes put together. Now, if somebody wants to look into something, they can look into Cascadia Rising 2022. And that is a program or planned out scenario of an 8.2 earthquake hitting the west coast of the United States. A pre-planned scenario. So I highly recommend everybody look into that. And to take it a step further, check this. Tesla, man-made earthquake machine. Now what's interesting is it talks about how Tesla created a man-made earthquake machine which worked like a little tiny device in which he could place up next to a building, and it would emit a certain frequency or resonance, and that building would fall or would crumble. So if you think about, for example, when earthquakes were happening in certain places and they would get hit with one after another at the exact same time, and if this device is true to what it is, this device could be part of the patents in which people received after Tesla died. Remember, when Tesla died, all of his patents were taken. All of his work was taken. Who took it? I can tell you who took it. There are a lot of three-letter agencies who have all of that information. So if the earthquake machine is right here, and you can look into Dale Pond, he also talks about Tesla's earthquake machine. It actually looked like a piston engine, and it would have a thing, and it would compress, sending a frequency right into the ground, and then causing things to shake, and then causing it to fall down. And if you think of the old stories, I think it's of the Walls of Jericho, I think that story is of a bunch of people walking around a building, chanting, using sound frequency, until the walls of Jericho fell down due to the sound frequency and the resonance going around the building until it collapsed. So if you think about these things, it's interesting. And as somebody just commented, there are companies that are using sound for oil drilling like that now. Interesting. So you get into this whole thing of how people are using this type of technology, and it's out there. Cymatics, as somebody just commented. Yes, sound frequency. Now, sound frequency can be harming on one side, but sound frequency can be healing on the other side. For example, whenever you walk into an old world building or a sacred cathedral, and someone starts to chant or sing or play the pipe organs, you have a very healing frequency that takes place that starts to heal the body. And the cells of the body, every cell, starts to look like the exact designs as the designs on the wall from the sound frequency. That is the power of cymatics and sound frequency. That's also why they don't play those pipe organs, because of the frequency in which they would generate, and it would probably blow people's minds. The pipe organs connect almost every single thing of this earth into those organs. They are connected into the planet. So that's another one too. Now what's interesting is it also talks about some new power systems. So Tesla was creating new power systems, which are never talked about. We're always told about the traditionals of like how we're going to all switch to renewables, even though they're trying to block out the sun. We're going to switch to solar panels while the White House is attempting to block out the sun. Makes a lot of sense, right? So then we go to the other Tesla coils. You have things that are superconductive, which was very fascinating. You get into little things like this, different types of superconductors. You also get into the connection into magnetism. He also talked about, which was really interesting, that over a certain amount of cycles, a human does not get electrocuted. Over 2,000 frequency, or cycles per second, because everything actually used to be in cycles per second, CPS, not hertz. Hertz was actually secondary. Hertz took over everything that we know today. It was actually cycles per second. So over 2,000 cycles per second, a person cannot get shocked. So that's why when you see a lot of these healing frequencies and these devices in which they come out with, a lot of the healing frequency devices are over 2,000 cycles per second. So that's what results in the healing, because the cycles cannot harm the body. Now, if we take it a step further, we talk about George Lakhovsky, the guy I always talk about with the multi-wave oscillator. George Lakhovsky created a device in which a person would sit in between, and basically what would happen was the metals would emit a frequency of all different metals, 13 different materials of circles that were on this side and circles which were on that side. And that's just like sound bathing, same exact thing. So these frequencies would emit, and a person would sit in front of the multi-wave oscillator, and they would be healed from the ailments instantaneously, usually within about 10 to 15 minutes. And that goes into somebody, as somebody just said, there's a zapper. Yes, same exact thing. It's called the HULDU zapper. That's what it's called. And it's one where a person would hold with their hands. And as they would go through and get a certain type of shock, it would resonate on both the right and the left at the same time, which would start to heal the person. So then we move into, then we get into it real good. So the magnifying transmitter. And Tesla was all about coils, and he talks all about this. And what's interesting is here's another one. If you guys can see that one, let's kind of zoom in on that. Now what's interesting is we get back to the same date again, 1902. Now if anybody watches Archaics, absolutely great soul, puts out so much information. He also talks about 1902 and the Phoenix resets of 1902. Now what's interesting is this patent 1119732, was in 1902. And look at this. It has huge coils on top. And this was a transmitter to transmit frequencies everywhere. You could light up light bulbs. You could turn on devices. You could power this fan if you want. All for free, harnessing the beautiful Mother Earth that's all around us and always pulsing all this free energy. You know, if you put a meter on it, then you can make money on it. And that's why J.P. Morgan Chase didn't fund any of these things, because Tesla was realizing how we can make all this stuff for free. Now, what's interesting is you have right in here, it says power by wire. See this? We are accustomed to power by wire. Now, we have moved to some wireless things, such as Wi-Fi and microwave frequencies, radio frequencies, and all that nonsense. That's all toxic. That's the best way to describe it. And we have power by wired, which is where, you know, you see your poles that are outside and they're all connected at the wires and things like that. But what's interesting is we go to the next page and we look at the other part, which is using Tesla coils, if you guys can see all that. And this is doing, if you want to see, wireless power right here. Wireless. Why is it wireless? Because what's happening is you have your Tesla coil right here. You have it connected to a source, such as running water. You have that other part connected to a ground, such as beautiful Mother Earth. And then you have an aerial antenna, or an atmospheric antenna, capturing the atmospheric energy. And if you get into all the atmospheric energy patents, what they used to do was they would send out a metallic balloon that was filled with helium, and they would send it up into the air, and the higher up that atmospheric balloon would go into the air, it would capture all the beautiful energy, and they would connect, for example, a piece of copper from those balloons and connect it down into a grid system, and they could get free energy. Now, what's interesting is they talk about atmospheric energy for about maybe an hour or two in the 3rd grade. They'll hit on atmospheric energy and talk about it for about an hour, and when you're in 3rd grade, and then they will never talk about it again. Reason being, because atmospheric energy is being captured by, as my buddy just said, old world tech. Yes, all those beautiful antennas and rods and all different types of spires and those points, those are all capturing the free energy. And so if you look at Tesla's patent, which is interesting because I'll have you can look this one up, 645-576, 1900 wireless patent. But what's interesting is, as this guy was saying in the book, the antenna is missing from the picture. You see an antenna from this Tesla coil, but you don't see what the antenna looks like. So the question is what did the antennas used to look like? And what were they using? Now it says also too that, this is fascinating, with using wireless, that's what the naval bases and the Navy uses, they actually emit things at a very low frequency, under 7.83 hertz, so that the frequency can be emitted all around the Earth. They send very low frequencies. And that's what Tesla was tapping into. Anything that is under 10 cycles per second, or 10 hertz, then what happens is that frequency can travel all across the whole entire Earth. Now, what's interesting is those frequencies also impact whales and dolphins who pick up on those frequencies. So when you get into this topic, you start to understand how a lot of these things, when it relates to this, are just crazy, and how we just were never taught about a lot of this stuff. And as we move into here, we go into how Earth resonance was a really big one, and how, here we go, so we talk about this, Earth resonance, and we talk about how Tesla predicted that his magnifying transmitter would prove most important and valuable to future generations, that it would bring about an industrial revolution and make possible great humanitarian achievements. Well, we didn't see any of that, because all of this was destroyed in World War II. Just about after World War II, they said, we don't need any of this, because J.P. Morgan Chase basically brought it up to the exact point in which it worked and it functioned, and then all of a sudden, they pretty much demolished it. They said, we didn't need any use for this. Well, we didn't need any use for this because this is a free way of transmitting energy to the entire planet. And the bigger this is, the more energy you can then transmit to all of the rest of the world. People wouldn't be dependent, as we said on the back, on oil, gas, and all of the other industries that are out there. They would actually just have the free energy of the old world.
Yeah.